The first time I heard the voice, it felt like wind through dry grass, soft, certain, and older than the road I stood on. "I'll spare you tonight," he said, "but my condition will haunt you forever." The sentence struck like a match in the dark. It didn't shout. It didn't threaten. It simply stayed, a single ember that refused to die, even when the sun rose and the desert pretended everything was fine. I didn't see him at first. I only saw the outline of the mesas, the stubborn stars, and the blinking red eye of my car. Alarm after it failed me on the loneliest stretch of highway I could have chosen. The map had promised a line, and I believed lines more than I believed people. The line turned to gravel, then to dust, and then to a kind of silence that made the air feel heavy. By the time the engine coughed and died, the last bar on my phone slipped away as if it were embarrassed to watch. You might think I'm building this up for suspense, because that's the kind of channel you clicked on long nights. Strange encounters, the kind of mystery that follows you home and asks for a glass of water. But this isn't a scream in the woods story. It started simple. It started with a stranger stepping into the little circle of light cast by my headlamps, a man whose presence bent the quiet in a respectful way, like a bow at the start of a ceremony. He was Apache, and he carried himself like a memory that had decided to keep living. Not a costume from a story, not a shadow out of legend, but a person, real, careful, alert. There was a calm to him, the kind that comes from living close to big land and big weather. He was older than me, not yet elderly, with eyes that didn't need to work hard to see. He looked at my car, then at me, and then at the horizon, where the last purple of evening was dissolving into clean black. "Road ended," he said, almost amused. "Happens to everyone sooner or later." I told him I'd taken a wrong turn. He nodded, as if I'd confessed to making water wet. He had the kind of patience you don't see much anymore. He didn't ask for money. He didn't try to sell me a miracle can of fuel. He didn't even ask what I was doing alone out there. The questions he did ask were simple. "You have water? You've been out here before? You know whose land this is?" I said I had a bottle and some mints. I said I'd passed the reservation sign an hour back. And I said the worst thing I could have said without knowing it, I thought. It was open land. He smiled without showing teeth. All land is open until you notice what it holds. We sat on the bumper while the night grew thick and comfortable around us. He told me a little about the wind that comes down from the hills and how it carries voices if you listen from the right side of yourself. He pointed out a single light far off the little town where he'd been heading before he found me parked cockeyed in the dust. The light looked like a ship in a dark harbor. The smell of sage drifted by, and with it, a feeling like I was exactly where I was supposed to be, even if I was lost. I asked his name. He glanced at me, then past me, the way people do when they're choosing their words with care. He said his name softly, in a way that made me hesitate to repeat it here. Not because he made a rule, but because some things feel less true when repeated out of place. So I'll call him what he was to me that night. The Apache, someone tied to the land in a way I could feel even if I didn't have the right words to explain it. He checked my engine with practiced hands, listening more, then tinkering, as if the machine had a say in the matter. "It'll start in the morning," he said. "Cold air will help. Tonight, you don't drive." Then he said the sentence I told you at the top, the line that will hang in the air for the rest of this story, the one you'll hear again when you turn off the lights and your house settles. "I'll spare you tonight, but my condition will haunt you forever." It wasn't a threat. That's important to understand. It was a boundary set with kindness, like a hand on your shoulder. Before you step into traffic, he wasn't interested in theater. He didn't loom or whisper or try to conjure fear from the vacuum. He sounded like someone who'd carried rules longer than I'd owned a car. "What condition?" I asked, I kept my tone light, like we were swapping trail advice or campfire stories. The kind of eerie tale that plays well in a YouTube story time, but leaves everyone laughing at the end. He looked at me like a person looks at a road sign that had been there all along. "I'll tell you," he said. "But you have to agree to hear it all, and you have to agree to tell it straight." "Tell it where?" "Wherever you carry your voice," he said, with a small tilt of his head toward the phone in my hand, the dark glass useless for calls, useful for recording. "You like stories. You chase them. This one will chase you back." I don't know why that eased me, but it did. Maybe because I trust a story more than I trust luck. I pressed the record icon anyway. Habit, muscle memory, the way you hit save even when you think you won't need to. The little red dot glowed like a tiny coal. He nodded at it once, then fixed his gaze on the horizon like he was reading from a teleprompter only he could see. "You're out here on a thin night," he said. Thin nights happen when the world looks like itself but feels like it's wearing someone else's clothes. The land looks the same. The stars are where they belong. But something's missing and you can't name it. That's when people take things they shouldn't: rocks from a place that remembers, wood from a tree that holds a prayer. They don't mean harm. They just want a souvenir. But on thin nights, souvenirs want you back. I said I hadn't taken anything. He held up a hand, gentle. "I know, but you came looking, and the land noticed." He let that sit. "So here's my condition, and it's not a curse and it's not a blessing. It's a promise to the land and to yourself." He told me to listen for a sound that didn't fit. Not a coyote or a truck or a plane, but a sound that sounded like it had nowhere better to be. "When you hear it," he said, "you stop what you're doing. You look around. You ask yourself what you're carrying that isn't yours. Sometimes it's a rock in a pocket. Sometimes it's a story you're telling wrong. Sometimes it's a silence you kept when you should have spoken. You put it down, you set it right, then you keep going." "That's it?" I asked. The night had grown so quiet I could hear my own blink. The keyword in my head was simple. This felt like a simple rule for a complicated world. He smiled again, more to himself than to me. "That's the part you can do," he said. "The part you can't do will do you." I must have looked confused, because he softened his voice the way people do when the dog in the house is anxious. "The land balances. It remembers being balanced. When people push, it pushes back not to punish, but to set the table straight. If you don't listen for the sound will find you. Not loud, not cruel, just steady. It will make its home in your day until you show it a better home." It wasn't spooky. It wasn't even strange. It felt like good advice disguised as a legend. Still, the phrase "haunting condition" turned over in my mind like a smooth stone. I thought of all the ways people collect things without meaning to. Pebbles, stories, secrets, little pieces of power that don't belong to them. I thought of how easy it is to forget who held them first. He poured a little water from his canteen onto the ground and spoke in his language. A few short lines that lifted and fell like walking over stones. He didn't translate. He didn't explain. He didn't need to. The gesture said enough. Some of what we take, we return. He stayed until the cold deepened and the sky opened wider. We talked about ordinary things: work, family, the price of gas, how city light hides the Milky Way, how the first time you really see it, it feels like someone tilted the ceiling to show you what was stored up there for later. He told me about a trailhead that looks like it leads nowhere, but puts you at the perfect angle to hear the river under the rock. He told me not to go there on a thin night. "You'll hear too much," he said. "Will I see you again?" I asked before the question could dry in my mouth. "Condition first," he said, "then maybe." He helped me settle into the car as if I were a guest in a small, stubborn house. He showed me how to wedge my jacket along the door to keep the draft off my neck. He tapped the hood twice, then stepped away from the light, letting the night close politely behind him. I watched his shape grow smaller, then dissolve into the mild silver of starlight. I listened. At first all I heard was the desert doing what deserts do, holding heat in its memory, exhaling it slowly. Then I heard it. A sound that didn't belong to any creature I knew, not mechanical, not distant. It sounded like a breath held too long. It sounded like the click before a story starts and the hush afterward. It sounded patient. It sounded like it had time. I sat up, heart thudding, not in fear but in recognition, as if the sound were saying my name in a room where everyone was facing the other way. I reached for my pocket, thinking of anything I might have taken. The pocket was empty except for lint and a folded receipt. I thought of the story itself, how I'd started to frame it in my head already, how easy it would be to turn a person into a prop, a culture into a backdrop, a night into content. I thought of the way he'd said, "Tell it straight." The sound came again, soft and even, like a metronome in the hands of someone who isn't counting time so much as keeping company with it. I opened the door. Cold air slipped in, smelling faintly of creosote and something older. I stepped onto the dirt with the careful feeling you get when you come into a house, where you've never been invited but everything in you knows you should remove your shoes. I spoke into the dark, not to the air, but to whatever the sound wanted me to acknowledge. I said, "I'm listening." The sound settled, not vanishing, not growing, but shifting to a place just left of my fear. My breath fogged once and then cleared, and suddenly the night felt like a room with the light turned off, not a void with no door. I won't tell you it was magic. I won't tell you I saw a figure made of stars or a path glow blue across the sand. I will tell you the condition was already working, not as a curse, not as a trick, but as a question I couldn't unhear. What am I carrying that isn't mine? The answer began to gather like a storm you can't see yet, but can feel tugging. Your thoughts. In the morning, the engine started as easily as you turn a page. The sky was a softer blue than I deserved. A hawk traced a calm line over the road, as if drawing me out of a dream. I rolled forward slowly, as if the tires were reading the surface for me. The light in the distance, his town lay like a promise, with its eyes closed. Before I left, I looked back at the place where we'd sat. No footprints, of course. The desert has a way of putting everything back where it wants it. I could have called it coincidence. I could have called it a lesson. I could have called it a story about a stranger helping a lost traveler and leave it there for the algorithm to sort. But the condition was awake now, and it didn't care what I called it. It cared what I carried next, so I carried this. The sound, the rule, and the feeling that I had been seen by the land and asked to look back with the same care. And I carried a choice, because that's what he left me with when he said he'd spare me tonight. Not the relief of safety, but the weight of attention. Back on pavement. The bars on my phone returned in a shy little ladder. I pressed play on the recording, ready to hear the exact words again, to catch anything I'd missed. The file was there, stamped with the right time, named with the right numbers. I hit the triangle. What came out wasn't his voice. It was the sound, soft, even, patient. It filled the car like a reminder. You can't turn down. I pulled over on the shoulder before the first gas station, hands light on the wheel, heart steady. Across the road, a small sign leaned into the morning breeze. It pointed toward a trail, the one he told me about, the one that lets you hear the river under the rock. The condition asked a question. What are you carrying that isn't yours? The answer waited somewhere ahead, under stone, inside water, within a story I had to tell straight or not at all. I turned off the engine. I stepped out into the quiet. And as the sound rose calm, insistent, Impossible to ignore, I took a single step toward the trail and felt the ground answer back. That's where this part ends. The next part begins with the first echo from under the rock and the first thing I had to set down before the path would let me pass. I took that first step like a test. Gravel shifted. The quiet didn't break. It adjusted as if moving to make room for me. The sound rose from under the stone the way breath rises from a sleeping chest, steady, soft, impossible to argue with. The sign at the road had only a number and a faded arrow, but the path itself was plain. It wound between low shrubs and patches of bare earth, then leaned toward a ridge that looked ordinary until you noticed how the rock ran in sheets, like pages laid flat by a careful hand. Somewhere beneath it, water was moving. Somewhere inside it, something waited to see what I would set down. I'm not a hiker by nature. I'm a collector of voices. I run a small channel where I tell true night stories, roadside mysteries, urban legends, the kind you listen to when you can't sleep and want company that doesn't ask anything from you. I learned to keep it simple, keep it human, keep the edit clean. I travel light, a camera, a lapel mic, a recorder the size of a deck of cards, a notebook with coffee rings on every page. People send tips, rumors, threads to pull. A week before, I ended up on this reservation road at the edge of a thin night. Someone wrote me about the river under the rock, a place that hums even when the wind is still. The message didn't have a name at the bottom, just a line I couldn't stop thinking about. Don't take anything but the hum. I thought then it meant gear leave the drone. Leave the sample jar. Don't pocket a pebble just because it's shaped like a raindrop. But when the Apache said his condition would haunt me, I knew the hum was not a souvenir. It was a reminder. The desert has its own content policy, older than the internet, simple as a gate across a 2-track road. You can cross if you close it behind you. The trail lifted and then flattened, and I could feel, more than hear, where the rock thinned above the water. It was like stepping over a basement in a house. The sound touched my bones in a small, polite way, like a neighbor knocking before they step inside. I stopped and listened. The wind came and went. The hum did not. I checked my pockets again, even though I knew better. A folded printout of my thumbnail mock-up for the video crinkled under my fingers. Big type, high contrast, the kind of thing that makes a scroll pause. Apache curse? The river that whispers your name. The design was neat in a way that felt cheap all at once. I didn't want to admit I'd mocked it up. I didn't want to admit how easy it was to reach for bait when you're tired and the algorithm keeps tapping its watch. The hum pressed a little harder, not angry, just there, waiting for me to recognize what I was carrying that wasn't mine. Looked for a place to sit where I wouldn't scuff anything important. No stacked stones, no carvings. Just a clean patch of rock warmed by the last of the night's release. I set the printout down. It didn't feel like much. Paper on stone. That's all. The sound didn't change. It stayed steady, like the truth does when you try to bargain with it. He told me the part I could do would be simple. The part I couldn't would do me. I thought about him as I sat there, the way his eyes rested on the horizon as if reading a line I couldn't see, the way he measured each sentence so it couldn't be used wrong later. He had not given me a legend. He had not offered me a spook. He had offered me a practice. Listen for the sound that doesn't fit. Put down what isn't yours. I pulled out my phone and opened the draft. I stared at the title field a long time. My fingers typed and deleted and typed again while the hum kept time. I changed curse to condition. I deleted the question mark and the whisper your name line. I replaced it with something smaller and braver. A night on sacred land and the river I could hear. It felt honest and a little bare, like stepping onto a porch without your jacket. I saved it. Then I opened the notes for the cold open and erased the line where I'd made the man into a silhouette with a dramatic caption. I wrote what he actually said. I added a line, told with respect. Told straight. I waited for the hum to slacken. It didn't. It settled deeper. The way a person settles into a chair when they've just started a story and planned to be there a while. I took a sip of water and poured a splash onto the stone the way he had, careful not to flood the little ants. Making stern travels across the grain. The water darkened the surface and then vanished into the pores, leaving a damp handprint that didn't belong to anyone. The scent that rose was mineral and clean, like a new book that has spent a week in the sun. It made me think of my mother's rule from when I was small. If you pick up 5 shells, put back 3. If you want to remember a place, teach yourself the shape of it, don't carry it off. Maybe the first thing I had to set down wasn't a thing. Maybe it was a habit. The habit of making a door out of someone else's story and walking through without knocking. I thought of a video I'd posted last spring about a roadside memorial I found alone on an evening drive. I told it like a ghost scene because the light was blue and the wind got weird and the cross had a ribbon that wouldn't stop moving. After it hit a few thousand views, a comment appeared from someone who seemed to know the people behind that cross. They asked me to take it down or change it. I told myself I didn't see it. Then I told myself I'd fix it later. I didn't. The comment vanished into the stack. I said out loud, "I'm sorry. Not theatrical. Not for the camera." No camera was running. The recorder, when I checked, showed a little bar pulsing with the hum, as if it could measure what my ears already knew. I set the phone face down. I took the printout and tore it, slow and neat, so I would feel each inch. I didn't scatter it. I put the pieces back in my bag to throw away later, off the land. I don't know how long I sat there. Time felt shallow. The east brightened. The hum stayed. Every now and then I heard something else, thin as thread, maybe a bird not ready to start yet, maybe a trick of the ear, maybe the river catching on a rock and slipping past. I thought about the man saying, "You'll hear too much." I wondered what too much would be. Was it a sound or a truth? Down the slope, a small patch of grass leaned toward the sun's edge, and beyond it, the scattered lights of the town laid a soft line, the way beads lay on a windowsill. He had said he was going there when he found me. He had said, "Condition first, then maybe." Maybe what? Maybe coffee at the diner where the bell on the door is tired but still proud? Maybe names. Maybe another sentence I wasn't ready to hold yet. I looked for dust on the road, a sign of him or anyone else, and saw only the gentle drift of morning making promises it kept every day with or without me. The hum moved, or maybe I moved inside it. I felt it at my jaw, then at my sternum, then at my hands, which had been busy even when I thought I was still. I remembered an interview from a winter travel series I did in a lake town. The old guide there had said, "Sometimes water sings because it's trapped and working. Sometimes it sings because it's free and happy. Our job is to know the difference." He'd laughed at himself, then added, "And stay out of the way when it's not about us." I took another breath and asked the question the condition forced on me, this time with less pride in the asking. What am I carrying that isn't mine? The words didn't vanish into the air. They hung there, and the hum braided through them and made something I didn't have the right to write down yet. It wasn't a translation. It was a direction. It nudged my memory to the inbox I had skimmed and the messages I had starred for later. It brought up one subject line. Like a stone rising in clear water. "You told my uncle's story wrong. Please call." I hadn't. I'd let it sink under press releases and receipts and the updates from the company that makes my editing software. Standing there, I could see the face of the man I'd interviewed for that episode, how he'd paused. before giving me a detail and then gone ahead anyway, trusting me to set it down clean. I had set it down neat, but not clean. I had added friction that made it slide better for strangers. The friction wasn't mine to add. I walked back up the trail, slow, my shoes making the kind of sound feet make when they're thinking. The light picked out bits of mica and made them wink in a way that felt friendly, not showy. At the car, the bars on my phone rose again, shy then sure. Messages stacked. I found the old email and opened it. A number. A name I won't use here. Lines that were patient even in their frustration. I pressed the call button. The line didn't ring. The hum filled the speaker instead, as if the phone had decided to be honest about what was real right now. I ended the call and tried again. Same thing. The hum, steady and low, like the underside of a promise. I didn't feel punished. I felt held to a standard I had agreed to without realizing it. Tell it straight, he'd said. I had said yes. So I said yes again. I recorded a voice memo. Not for upload, not for anyone but the person who had written to me and the land that was listening. I said their uncle's story had been bent by my edit. I said I was sorry. I said I would fix it and ask for their help to fix it, and if they wanted it down, it would come down. I said thank you. I hit send. The signal bar blinked. The message left. The hum didn't reward me. It didn't need to. It stayed, like breath, like tide, like a neighbor you trust who keeps their porch light on for themselves and not for you. I took that as a good sign, not applause, not doom. Life going on while you learn to move more carefully inside it, before. I pulled onto the road. I set one more thing down. It was small, but it was mine. I turned off the camera's face-smoothing filter I always left on by default, the one that makes low light kinder than it is. If I was going to tell this straight, my face could carry the night as the night actually looked. I imagined talking to the lens later, explaining the condition without turning it into a stunt. I imagined the comments that would come. Some would want the spook anyway. Some would feel the hum and not know what to call it. Some would hear nothing and think I'd staged it. That was fine. The point wasn't to convince. The point was to carry what was mine and stop carrying what wasn't. Back on the highway. I drove toward the town he had pointed out, the tires humming their own note that threaded with the one from the rock until I couldn't tell which belonged to the road and which belonged to the river under it. The day spread thin clouds like gauze. A hawk made its usual unbothered round. A sign warned about cattle and then about curves and then about nothing at all for a long, clean mile dot at the edge of town. The first building was a clinic with a hand-painted mural of plants I recognized from the night air sage yucca, a flower that opens like it's speaking. A kid on a bike cruised past. A dog trotted behind with a look that said they knew the route and the rules. I parked near a diner where the doorbell did sound tired and proud, just like I imagined. Inside, a man in a cap nodded at me as if we already knew each other a little because morning has a way of doing that in places where it shows up on time. I looked for him. The man from the road. I looked for a sign I could read and not mistake. I didn't see him, but I did see a flyer near the register for a community night. Stories and songs. Everyone welcome. Bring water. Bring respect. I touched the edge of the paper and felt the hum find me through the floorboards, or maybe I just remembered it well enough to hear it in anything now. I ordered coffee and sat by the window, notebook open, pen ready. The plan was to wait, to listen, to ask the right person the right way. The plan felt good because it wasn't mine alone. It belonged to the condition I had agreed to carry. I wrote the first line for the next part out loud so I would hear how it stood in the air. I'll spare you tonight, he said, but my condition will haunt you forever. Then I added the piece I hadn't earned before. The haunting isn't a shadow. It's an invitation to pay attention. The bell. On the door sounded again. Boots on tile. A small hush that wasn't fear, just attention turning, the way a lake stills at dusk without a reason you can point to. I looked up, heart steady, breath even, ready to listen first. The hum came with whoever had stepped inside, soft as ever. A thread you could follow through rock if you were patient. I lifted my eyes and saw who the morning had brought. The door of the diner swung shut, and with it came a shift in the air. The sound of forks, quiet conversation, even the hum of the old ceiling fan all seemed to slow by half a beat. The man who stepped in wasn't the Apache from the night before, but he carried a weight that made me sit straighter. His presence wasn't loud. It was steady, the kind of presence you notice in a room without anyone pointing it out. He nodded to the server, who didn't ask what he wanted, just poured him coffee before he reached the counter. That's how you know someone is rooted, when they don't have to order anymore. I thought he might glance my way, but he didn't. He settled into a booth 2 tables from mine, laid his hat down carefully, and stared at the steam rising from the mug as though the lines it made in the air meant something. I kept my eyes on my notebook, though I wasn't writing. The hum was back, faint through the floorboards, threading my nerves into attention. I could feel that whatever was happening wasn't just about me. It was bigger, wider, as if I'd stumbled into a current that had been flowing long before I arrived and would keep going after I left. Listen to the fragments of talk drifting across the diner. A couple of ranchers near the door were complaining about a dry well. A mother was telling her kid to stop balancing sugar packets on the edge of the napkin holder. The man at the booth, quiet, careful, finally spoke to the server. "It's thin again," he said. She paused with the pot of coffee, then set it down slow, as if the weight of his words asked her to. "Out by the ridge?" she asked. He nodded. River under the rocks louder than it should be. I felt the hair rise on my arms. The words weren't directed at me, but they folded into what I already knew. Thin nights, the hum, the warning. It wasn't a private story anymore. It was a living one. The conflict I thought I'd been handed wasn't just about my choices, my mistakes, or even the conditions set on me. It was about how many people carried the same awareness in different ways, and what happened when someone ignored it. That was when I noticed the flyer again on the register. The community night. Stories and songs. Everyone welcome. It wasn't an event for tourists. It was something else. It was where the stories lived out loud, not pinned down by recordings or edits. I wondered if the man from last night would be there. I wondered if this new figure, the one with silence that drew people to listen, would speak too. I wondered what kind of welcome I would get if I walked into a room meant for remembering, not for performance. The server brought my plate of eggs and toast. She looked at me a little longer than she needed to, like she could tell I'd overheard more than I should. "You traveling through?" she asked. I nodded. "Car trouble," I said. "Road ended." Her mouth tugged up in a small smile that reminded me of the Apache's calm amusement. "Roads end in different places for different people," she sighed, then walked away without waiting for me to answer. I picked at my food but didn't taste it. My mind kept circling the same point. The condition wasn't a private warning. It was something layered into the community, into the land itself. If the river under the rock was louder than it should be, maybe that meant others hadn't been setting things down. Maybe it meant too much had been taken, carried, twisted, and left unreturned. I thought of the stories on my channel, the ones that weren't mine to tell but had gotten views anyway. I thought of the comments I'd ignored, the weight of all that pressed heavier than the hum, and then came the subplot I hadn't expected. A man at the far end of the counter pulled out a stone, smooth and dark, and laid it next to his plate. "Found it by the ridge," he said, loud enough for the room. "Thought it'd look good on the porch." His tone was casual, but the reaction wasn't. The server's face went still. The quiet man in the booth finally looked up, his eyes sharp in a way that wasn't anger, but something more cutting, recognition. "Put it back," he said. The man at the counter laughed. "It's just a rock." The hum rose beneath me, not just in my ears but in my chest, and I knew it wasn't just me who heard it. The boy with the sugar packets froze mid-stack. The ranchers stopped their conversation. Even the dog outside tied to a post, waiting for scraps, let out a low sound, not quite a growl, more like an uneasy sigh. The rock on the counter looked ordinary, but everything in the room leaned toward it as if it were a weight pulling us off balance. The man in the booth stood, slow, deliberate. "Thin nights don't forgive porch stones," he said. His voice was even, but it carried the same authority the Apaches had carried on the roadside. "If you keep it, the sound will follow you. It'll make your walls hum, your sleep hum, your luck hum. And not in a way you'll want." The man at the counter shifted, uncomfortable, but pride kept him from backing down. "Superstition," he said. "That's all." He tucked the stone into his jacket pocket. The hum tightened, a coil of sound that made the diner lights flicker. For a breath before steadying again. That was when I realized the conflict wasn't just inside me. It was playing out everywhere, between respect and pride, between listening and dismissing, between people who knew the rules and people who didn't think rules applied. I was one of those people not long ago. Maybe I still was. And now I was caught in the middle, carrying a condition that demanded I choose which side of the story I stood on. The man in the booth didn't argue further. He just sat back down, his hat still on the table, his coffee cooling. The server cleared her throat and told the man at the counter, "Community nights at 7. If you bring that stone, you better bring a reason too." Her voice was sharp, but her eyes carried something softer, like she was hoping he'd listen before it was too late. He didn't answer. He finished his food quick and left a few bills under the plate. When he walked out, the dog outside gave another low sound. Then went silent. The diner slowly picked back up again, clatter-chatter, the rhythm of a normal morning. But the hum stayed. It threaded through my ribs, reminding me I wasn't just a witness. I was inside the same condition as everyone else. And maybe the main conflict wasn't about whether the land punished those who disrespected it. Maybe it was about whether people could listen in time to avoid punishing themselves. I paid my bill and stepped outside. The sky was wide and pale, the kind of morning light that makes everything look washed clean. But the hum followed me, softer. Now, like it was waiting for my next move. I thought about the man with the stone. I thought about the community night. I thought about the choice I had to slip away with a video draft that bent the truth, or to stay and risk telling it straight. In a room where everyone would know if I got it wrong. That was when the conflict deepened again. Across the street, on a bench near the mural of sage and flowers, sat the Apache. He hadn't been in the diner. He hadn't needed to be. He was waiting where I would see him if I was paying attention. His eyes met mine, steady and unreadable. And I felt the weight of the question settle harder than before. What are you carrying that isn't yours? I crossed the street without looking back. I didn't know if I was walking toward resolution or deeper into the problem. But I knew one thing. The condition wasn't letting me go. Not yet. And as I reached the bench, the hum rose again, louder than the sound of traffic, louder than the voices drifting from the diner. It rose like the beginning of a story that hadn't been told straight in a long time. And this time, I knew I wasn't the only one expected to listen. He didn't speak at first. He just watched me, the way the desert watches, patient, steady, as though it knows you'll give yourself away if you sit long enough in the silence. The hum was stronger here, running through the bench, through the solace of my shoes, into the steady line of my spine. I wanted to look away, but something in his gaze kept me still. Not trapped, not forced, just reminded that running never solved what followed. Finally, he said, "You heard it." I nodded. My throat felt dry, not from heat, but from the weight of admitting it out loud. "I did," I said, "and I can't stop." His eyes softened, but his voice stayed even. "Good. That means you're learning. But now comes the part you don't want." He let the words hang, giving them their own shape before adding, "The condition doesn't end when you listen once. It begins. You set one thing down, but there's more you carry. Always more. That's why it haunts, because most people never finish." I thought of the man at the diner counter, the one who pocketed the stone. I thought of the flicker of the lights, the silence that dropped over the room like a sheet. What happens to him? I asked. The Apache's jaw tightened. What happens to all who carry what isn't theirs? The sound grows until it fills the house. The walls hum, the sleep hums, the luck hums. Then they wonder why everything they touch feels hollow. He leaned forward slightly. "You've told stories wrong before. Bent them. Polished them for eyes that didn't earn them. That's a kind of taking. You feel the hum now because the land gave you a warning. But warnings are not forever. Thin nights don't wait." The hum rose again, louder this time, as if to agree. It pressed against my chest until I had to breathe shallow just to stay calm. I thought of all the stories stacked in my hard drive, labeled neat, scheduled to release. I thought of how many weren't mine, how many had been offered with trust I hadn't fully honored. My skin prickled with the realization that the conflict wasn't just out there in the ridge or the town. It was inside me, thick as blood. He stood then, slow and sure, like a tree rising out of shade. "Tonight," he said. "Community night. You will sit, you will listen. And if you speak, you will tell it straight. No camera, no filter. Just voice and presence. That is the condition." My stomach dropped. Speaking into a lens was easy. Speaking into a room where everyone would know if I twisted a single word, that was different. That was risk. That was exposure. I opened my mouth to answer, but before I could, a sound cut across the street. A rumble, uneven, like tires over gravel where no gravel should be. A pickup truck slowed, and in the passenger seat, I saw the man from the diner counter. His jacket bulged where the stone still rested. He glanced at me, then at the Apache, and smirked like someone who thought the whole thing was a show he'd already outsmarted. The hum spiked so sharply that the window of the truck vibrated as it rolled past. The driver said something, but the passenger only tapped his pocket and laughed. The Apache didn't move, didn't call out, didn't chase. He just watched the truck disappear toward the highway. Then he looked at me again, his face carved with something heavier than anger. "That sound you feel now, it's his too. But he doesn't know how to listen, and when someone won't listen, everyone else has to." The tension knotted in my chest. If the condition spread, if the hum followed not just one person but anyone near, then the whole town could feel it, maybe already did. And community night, maybe that wasn't just stories and songs. Maybe it was how they kept the balance from tipping too far. As evening crept closer, the weight of anticipation thickened. The sky bled from pale to fire to ash, and the hum threaded every moment. It was in the floorboards of the diner when I returned for coffee. It was in the low conversations drifting between people on the street. It was in the way lights flickered on porches before holding steady. The condition wasn't mine alone anymore. It was shared, woven, a collective sound pulling everyone toward the same place. When the time came, I walked with the others toward the hall on the edge of town. It was small, plain, with wooden steps worn smooth by years of use. A single bulb glowed above the door, swinging slightly though the air was still. Inside, rows of chairs faced a circle rather than a stage. No microphones, no cameras. Just space for presence. The Apache stood at the back, his eyes fixed on me as I entered. A few faces turned. Some recognized me from the diner. Some didn't. All carried the same quiet expectancy, like they already knew what had brought me there. The hum filled the room, steady and insistent, rising just enough to remind me that this was no performance. The first story began, told by an elder with a voice like sand over stone. He spoke of nights when the river under the rock grew so loud it cracked windows in the old houses, when people had to gather and put down what they'd carried wrong. He spoke of a boy who once pocketed a single feather and heard it in his dreams, until he returned it with an apology. The hum shifted with the story, louder, softer, like it was listening too. I sat on the edge of my chair, my heart beating against the rhythm of the sound. My turn hadn't come yet, but I knew it would. The Apache had said, "If you speak, you will tell it straight. And if I didn't? If I bent it again?" The hum seemed to answer in advance, pressing sharp against my ribs, reminding me of the man in the truck, of the stone in his pocket, of the laugh that didn't belong. As another story began, a door opened at the back. The air shifted colder. Heads turned. The man from the diner counter stepped in, the stone still heavy in his jacket. The hum roared through the floor, through the walls, through the breath of every person in the room. No one told him to leave. No one told him to sit. The silence was its own judgment, and it held him where he stood. My pulse raced. This was it, the moment before something breaks, before balance tips one way or the other. The hum was no longer background. It was inside every heartbeat, every breath, every thought. And I knew my voice would be called on before the night ended. I knew the condition would demand it. The man with the stone looked around, smirk fading as he realized no one shared it. He touched his pocket once, then froze, because the sound had shifted again. It wasn't steady anymore. It was rising, louder, closer, as if the river under the rock had left its bed and was moving through the room itself. I gripped the edge of my chair, every nerve on fire. The conflict I had been circling since that night on the roadside was here, thick and inescapable. Respect or pride, listening or taking, truth or performance. And the hum demanded a choice, not later, not someday, but now. The elder's voice faded. The circle fell into silence, not empty but heavy, waiting. Then the Apache looked at me and spoke for the first time that night. "Your turn." The hum swelled until it was all I could hear. The stone glowed faint in the man's pocket, or maybe it was just the way the light bent, but either way it held every eye in the room. My mouth went dry. My heart thudded like a drum. And as I rose to speak, the sound rose with me, building, pressing, ready to crack the air itself if the next words bent wrong. The climax hadn't come yet, but it was waiting in my breath, in the hum, in the silence of 100 listening ears. And there was no turning back. The silence in the hall felt alive, like every breath was being held at the same time. I stood, knees unsteady, my hands damp even though the air was dry. The hum pressed against me, steady and powerful, like the Fowler River itself had risen into the room. I opened my mouth, and for the first time since I started telling stories, I wasn't thinking about pacing or editing, or whether a thumbnail would catch the right kind of scroll. I was only thinking about the condition, the promise I had made to tell it straight. I said, "I met him last night on the road. My car had died, and I thought I was stranded. He told me the road didn't end, it just ended for me. He said he'd spare me, but his condition would haunt me, and it has. Because it's not about a curse or a legend, it's about carrying what isn't yours, and how the sound will follow you until you set it down." My voice cracked a little, but I didn't hide it. I let the room hear it. The hum softened, like it was giving me space. I kept going. I told them how I'd mocked up a thumbnail, twisting the story into something it wasn't, I told them about. The ignored messages, the stories I'd bent because I thought I was doing the right thing for an audience that wanted mystery, not honesty. And I told them how the sound had followed me into the car, into the diner, into my bones, until I couldn't ignore it anymore. When I finished, I didn't sit. I looked straight at the man who had taken the stone. His jacket bulged where it pressed against his chest. His hand twitched over the pocket like he could feel it moving. The hum swelled again, sharper, as if the whole room was waiting on him now. His smirk had vanished. His face was pale, jaw set tight. He tried to speak, but the sound drowned him out. The elder spoke instead, his voice strong even against the rising hum. "It isn't too late. Put it down. Not tomorrow. Not later. Now." The man's hand finally moved. He pulled the stone from his pocket, and in the dim light it didn't look ordinary anymore. Its surface pulsed faintly, like it held the rhythm of the hum itself. He stared at it, his breath ragged, then placed it in the center of the circle on the floor. As soon as it touched the wood, the hum dropped. Not gone, never gone, but softer, calmer, as if the river under the rock had found its bed again. No. One clapped. No one cheered. That wasn't the way of it. The silence was enough, the kind that settles like dust after a storm. The man's shoulders sagged, and for the first time since I'd seen him, he looked small, not weak, just human, like the pride had drained out and left him facing himself. I sat back down, my pulse still racing, but lighter somehow, as though I'd set something down too. The Apache caught my eye across the room. He gave a single nod, and I felt the weight of approval, not as a reward, but as recognition that I had listened and spoken, and held the condition as best I could. The circle went on. More stories were told of thin nights, of wrongs made right, of people who had learned too late and others who had listened in time. Each story carried its own hum, and each hum braided into the larger one, steady, unbroken, eternal dot by the end of the night. The hall felt warmer, lighter. The people drifted out, one by one, not in a rush but in quiet pairs, as if the balance had been restored, at least for now. I stayed until the last of the chairs scraped back into place. When I stepped outside, the air was cool and clean. The stars above looked brighter, closer, as if the thin night had given way to something stronger, something rooted. The Apache was waiting by the steps. He didn't speak at first, just looked at me with those steady eyes. Then he said, "You told. It's straight." "I tried," I said. "That's all the condition ever asks," he replied. He paused, then added, "It will follow you still. Not as punishment, as reminder. Each time you take what isn't yours, you'll hear it. And each time you listen, you'll know what to set down." We walked together to the edge of the street, where the night met the quiet road. He stopped there, looking out toward the horizon. "The sound never leaves," he said. "It just waits. That's how you know you're still part of the balance." I wanted to ask him more about the river, about thin nights, about what it meant to live with the condition day after day. But something in me knew I'd been given enough. The rest wasn't for me to take. The next morning, I packed my gear into the car. The engine turned over without complaint, like it had never failed. The road stretched ahead, long and familiar, but I didn't feel like I was leaving something behind. I felt like I was carrying something forward, something that wasn't mine, but had been entrusted to me as long as I treated it with respect. I drove for miles with the radio off, just listening. The hum was still there, faint, steady, like the beat of a heart you don't always notice until you stop. I thought about the man with the stone. I wondered if he would hear it again, and if he'd learn to listen. I thought about my channel, my work, my stories. For the first time, I didn't think of them as content. I thought of them as voices that had trusted me, voices I had to carry carefully, When I finally stopped for gas on the far side of the highway, I opened my notebook and wrote one sentence at the top of a fresh page. Tell it straight. Underneath it, I wrote the line that had started it all. I'll spare you tonight, but my condition will haunt you forever. I knew the hum would follow me, but I wasn't afraid of it anymore. It wasn't a curse. It wasn't a burden. It was a guide, a sound that reminded me to pay attention, to set down what wasn't mine, to carry only what I could hold with honesty. Driving on, the desert stretched wide, the mesas rising like watchful faces. The sun climbed higher, and the road shimmered with heat. I thought of the river under the rock, the way it sang through the stone, the way its voice had wound itself into mine. And I realized the haunting wasn't about fear. It was about responsibility. About remembering that even stories like stones have weight. By the time I reached the next town, I knew how I would tell it. Not with suspense for its own sake, not with shadows bent into shapes they weren't meant to hold. I would tell it the way it was given, simple, steady, human. Because the land had asked me to, and the hum would remind me if I ever forgot. The condition didn't end that night. It never would. It stayed with me, patient and even, like a thread I could follow through silence, through noise, through every choice I made. And maybe that was the point. Not to be spared once, but to learn how to carry myself every day after as the miles rolled behind me. The words of the Apache echoed clear as the road itself. The part you can't do will do you. I understood now. The sound wasn't punishment. It was presence. And as long as I kept listening, it would never let me lose my way. So I listened. And I drove, and I carried the story forward, not mine, but trusted to me straight and unbroken, like the hum of the river under the rock.